Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here with all of you, and particularly to be on the pulpit at the National Cathedral. This cathedral celebrates the common religious themes that bind Americans together. This is the place where our nation officially celebrates what as a nation we have to celebrate and mourns what as a nation we have to mourn. A cathedral such as this is a symbol of an inner space. The Gothic architecture points upward. We are reminded here of a space more important than any building, and that is a space inside our hearts. Both Marjorie and Tirza yesterday, speaking of the Jewish and the Christian traditions, spoke about prayerfulness, spoke about the sacred feminine, and yet there is more that goes on inside the temple of God as well. That temple space within us, and I believe that should be reflected in the temple space within the material world, is also a place where, according to both Judaism and Christianity and other religions in their own way, it is recognized that God shall not be mocked. In A Course in Miracles, it points out that the line "God shall not be mocked" simply means He isn't. And in both the Jewish and the Christian tradition, God is not pleased with hypocrites. You know, it is one of the great principles of our country that there is a separation of church and state. The separation of church and state is actually a very enlightened concept. It means that no religious figure gets to walk over to the Capitol or the White House or the Supreme Court and say, "You cannot make this or that law, you cannot execute this or that law, you cannot repeal this or that law because it does not match my religious doctrine." The other side of the greatness of the separation of church and state is that nobody from Congress, nobody from the White House, and nobody from the Supreme Court can come into this building and say, "You cannot tell the truth," because it does not match the status quo we establish. As Sharon Salzberg said yesterday, the most rebellious act is to stand in compassion. And it is painful for me, and I think is painful for any conscious person in America today, to have to recognize that this is a moment in American history where our commitment to compassion is as low as it has ever been. The Rahmanis that Rabbi Firestone spoke of yesterday, the connection of the notion of compassion to the womb, is a powerful concept, not only physically but spiritually as well. For regardless whether we are a man or a woman, and regardless whether we are a woman of childbearing age or not, our consciousness is the womb out of which life then flows. And the mother is not someone who always gets to have a good time. In order to gestate a child growing within the womb, if someone comes into the room where a pregnant woman is standing and they are smoking or doing anything else which could endanger that fetus, it is the role, the moral role, the spiritual role, the biological role, the God-given role of the woman to say, "Not around this baby, you don't." You know, in any advanced mammalian species that survives and thrives, there is a common anthropological characteristic. And that is the fierce behavior of the adult female when she senses a threat to the children. When we see in a National Geographic or Discovery Channel special the fierce behavior of the lioness or the tigress when she senses there might be a threat to her cubs, no one says about the fierce lioness or the fierce tigress, I think she's strident. I think she's a little negative. She must be working out her anger issues. Do you know that female hyenas, adult female hyenas, encircle their cubs while the cubs are feeding? They will not let the adult males anywhere near the food until those cubs have eaten. Surely the women of America could do better than the hyenas. When we speak of the role of the sacred feminine, let us not fall in to a gooey, sentimental, pink paint-coated notion of the sacred feminine. She is fierce when she has to be, and there's nothing negative about pointing out there's a fire in the house, if indeed there is. When Sharon reminded us yesterday that although she hadn't really said it, it would have been a cool thing to say, that compassion is the most rebellious act. Let us be very clear that in America today, you can't serve the status quo and stand for compassion at the same time. Mahatma Gandhi and then Martin Luther King, having gone to India and studied the principles of nonviolence as articulated by Mahatma Gandhi, bringing them back to this country and applying those principles to the struggle for civil rights in the 1960s, stood on the notion that the love which heals our interpersonal relationships, according to Mahatma Gandhi, can heal our social and political relationships as well. Martin Luther King Jr. said about Mahatma Gandhi, he is the first person in human history, he said, to take the love ethic of Jesus Christ, which in the mind of King was the love ethic of Jesus Christ, in the mind of Gandhi was a universal ethic of love. He said he's the first person to take that love ethic beyond mere personal interaction and turn it into a broad-scale social force for good. Ladies and gentlemen, terrorism is an emotion turned into an externalized political force. It is hatred turned into a political force. And the only strength powerful enough to defeat that hatred and that political force is love turned into a political and social force. But some people say, how can we do that? Those who believe that hatred is strong and love is weak do not see how to accomplish this. But you know, I cannot imagine a kinda, sorta, sometimes when it's convenient, committed terrorist. Terrorists are people who have embraced a worldview that you and I admittedly see as filled with hate, but they are convicted behind it. And they have dedicated their lives, that their very lives might be instruments for the perpetration of that worldview. Every time there's a terrorist act, domestically or internationally, it seems to me the American president always describes the act as cowardly. And I always scratch my head and I think wicked, yes, evil, yes, violent, yes, unconscionable, yes, but cowardly, I'm not so sure. The truth of the matter is, hatred has a perverse kind of courage. Contrast that with the fact that I know many, many, many people, and I know that I am sometimes one of them, kind of, sort of, casually, when it's convenient, committed to love. And so the problem is not that there is more hate in this world than love. Far from it. The problem on the planet today is that those relatively few people on this earth whose hearts are filled with hatred are ironically and tragically often more convicted behind their hatred than we are convicted behind our love. And so we cannot say that love cannot overcome all of the problems of the world when in fact we have not yet tried. Now, the love that will save the world is not just love for people we like. The love that will save the world is not just love for people who think and act like us. And as women, in order for us to help interrupt the suicidal rampage that humanity is currently engaged in, you and I believe, must come to understand that the love for children that is absolutely fundamental to the evolutionary impulse cannot and must not be simply love for our children. The love that will save this world, the love that will transform this world, the love to which this great cathedral is dedicated is a love which loves children on the other side of the world every bit as much as it loves our own. Here in this cathedral, in our nation's capital, let us tell truth. A nation that claims to stand for peace rushed to war. A nation that claims to love God is currently involved in a great withdrawal of resources to the least among us. And a nation that purports to stand for freedom actually means for those we choose to have it. This is not cause for anger, but it is cause for grief. It is cause for tears. To be conscious today is to be in pain. That pain is not unspiritual. There is the crucifixion before there is the resurrection. And if you skip the crucifixion, you're not in transcendence, you are in denial. There is the slavery in Egypt before there is deliverance to the promised land. And if you skip the part about Pharaoh and the slavery of the Israelites, you are not in transcendence, you are in denial. And yet those tears by which we realize that, for instance, in just one case alone, over 1,000 American soldiers have died in Iraq. Estimates say that 100,000 Iraqis have died in the Iraq war so far, when now we realize, oh, there were no weapons of mass destruction, and yet so many people kept saying at the time, what is the rush? Ladies and gentlemen, it's not for me to say, nor is it for the spiritual and religious impulse of this great cathedral to determine what your political views should be about the Iraqi war or anything else. However, for us to be true to the Spirit of God within us all, let us at least cry. Let us at least mourn. Let us at least grieve. But American culture has an answer for our tears. It has an answer for our grief. It has an answer for our unhappiness. And that is that we should take antidepressants like candy. I'd like to tell you a story about depression. You know, some scientists went to a chimpanzee village in Africa. And they noticed that 10% of the chimpanzees displayed what they called depressed behavior. That means that those chimpanzees were not eating with the rest of the chimps. They were not sleeping with the rest of the chimps. They were not playing with the rest of the chimps. They were out on the outskirts of the chimp village. So the social scientists thought that was very fascinating because those 10% represented the exact percentage in human society of those who display depressed behavior. So the scientists wanted to do an experiment. They took the quote-unquote depressed chimps away for 6 months, and then they brought them back to see the effect that their absence would have on the chimp village. What do you think they found when they came back? Can someone tell me? What do you think they found? Another 10% was depressed. Any other guesses? You know, this is so fascinating to me. I've told this story literally all over the country, and everybody says with great certainty exactly what you just said. Oh, they came back and found that there was another 10% of depressed chimps. Would you like to know what they found? All the chimps in the village were dead. And what they realized was that the depressed chimps were the early warning system of the village. The depressed chimps were the ones who saw when tigers were coming, or lions, or snakes, or elephants, or storm clouds, and they came back and they warned the village. Ladies and gentlemen, it is said that 1/4 of American women are diagnosed as clinically depressed. We are depressed for a reason, and our depression should not just be a gold mine for pharmaceutical companies. When you have a broken leg, when you have a broken arm, you don't just take morphine to cover up the pain. You have to look at the fact that there's pain for a reason. And when we have psychic pain and emotional pain and spiritual pain, it is there for a reason. It is telling us something is wounded and must change. So the fact that American women are depressed is for a reason. We can smell something. We can sense something. And the mother, the conscious mother, the giver of life, when she sees a threat to her children, a threat to her grandchildren, a threat to her great-grandchildren and her great-grandchildren's children, does not say, "Oh, let me distract myself." She says, "Stop right there. Stop right there." For compassion, ladies, has a fierce face. You know, Sharon, speaking from the Buddhist tradition, there is the Tara figure, there's the white Tara, the black Tara, the red Tara, the yellow Tara. The feminine face of God is fierce when she has to be. Now, Martin Luther King and Gandhi, of whom I spoke earlier, stood on a ground of being. And that ground of being said that we can externalize our love, externalize our compassion. Several years ago, I was given the great honor of being asked by Coretta Scott King if I would speak at Ebenezer Baptist Church, Dr. King's pulpit, on the official celebration of his birthday. And the speakers before me kept talking about how Dr. King stood for love, 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 brotherhood, love, love. It is so amazing how once people die, we turn them into whatever caricature is convenient for us. And yet when I got up to speak, being a student of Dr. King myself, I felt the need to point out that all this love that everybody was talking about was not and is not easy. The love for which Dr. King stood was not convenient to the status quo during his lifetime, and it is not convenient to the status quo today. And I believe that every woman, talking about women's spirituality, one of the great acts of the current Pope is that he apologized to women for what was, in fact, the effort by the early church to systematically destroy the passionate, free-thinking woman during the Middle Ages. During the Inquisition, it is said that anywhere from several 100,000 to up to 800,000 women died at the stake. What a way to die. This was a female Holocaust. Now, if you have women who speak their mind, and why did the church want to eradicate the passionate, free-thinking woman? I'll tell you why. You and I both know why. Because passionate, free-thinking women tend to raise passionate, free-thinking kids. And passionate, free-thinking kids turn into passionate, free-thinking adults who are very difficult to manipulate and almost impossible to control. And yet, if every passionate, free-thinking female is marched off, God forbid, to the stake to be burned after enough centuries, if you have a little girl with sparkle, you teach her to be beige. We have a cellular memory, I believe, of having been punished for speaking our minds. For make no mistake about it, those women that the early church sought to destroy were the vestiges of the pagan tradition that held forth the connection of the individual with the divinity of the sky and the divinity of the rocks and the divinity of the rivers. The destruction of the so-called witches, which actually means wise women, was the beginning, by the way, of the rush towards environmental degradation. Anytime any institution seeks to control people, it must suppress the passionate, free-thinking woman. A woman who refuses to speak her mind refuses to give birth. Because today, you know, as Martin Luther King said, the day you begin to stop talking about things that matter is the day your life begins to end. And so for those of us who do have that cellular memory of knowing that there was a time when if we spoke our minds, we were liable to be killed. You know, the Emancipation Proclamation eradicated slavery. It was an external remedy for an externalized symptom. The Emancipation Proclamation could not eradicate racism. It was another generation's task to eradicate the externalized symptom. It is our task to eradicate the cause. And so it is as well. We stopped burning women at the stake, but we have still not yet eradicated from Western consciousness a projection of suspicion onto the passionate woman who speaks her mind. All we've done is change the consonant. And so, I believe as a gathering of women in this great cathedral, called together not under the auspices of man, but by the auspices of God. I believe as women who are here seeking to reclaim the feminine nature of the divine, we are here not on man's business, but on God's business. I do believe in a compassionate God. I do believe in an all-merciful God. But I believe that we receive God's blessings to the extent to which we extend God's blessing. Our nation has been so blessed because we have been so often a blessing unto the world. But on any given day, in any given situation that we refuse to be a blessing onto the world, we don't get karmic coattails where we just get to say, but we were a blessing on the world, so surely God will bless us now. It's law, ladies and gentlemen. God is not personal about it. If you walk out into the sunshine, sun will shine on you, whether you are evil or whether you are good. If you extend love, blessings will be unto you. Blessings will be unto your nation, and blessings will be unto your children. And if you do not extend love, but rather you meet the world with fear, if you do not use the power of love so much as the power of fear, if you give more resources to instruments of fear than to instruments of love, if you make as the underpinning of your civilization economic principles rather than humanitarian principles, you are a money changer. If you make the underpinnings of your right relatedness to the world that you will spend billions and billions of dollars on military hardware, on ways to kill people, rather than attending to conflict resolution and ways that you can help people, then you will suffer, not because God doesn't love you, but because he shall not be mocked. When God sees us make mistakes as a nation, he does not turn his face from us. It's not that he doesn't love us anymore, but he calls us to repent. He calls us to atone. So I believe in this great gathering of women here in this great cathedral, in order for us to be true to the divine creator within us, in order to be true to our ancestors, our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers. In order to be true to our great-grandmothers, we will speak our minds. And in order to be true to our great-grandchildren, we will tell truth to power, and we will say, let us not pretend that America has no sins. Let us not pretend that we have always been compassionate. Let us not pretend that we are compassionate now, and let us ask God for forgiveness. I believe that God is asking us at this time more than anything else to atone. I do not believe in a God that would have us pray for our soldiers, but not for other people in the world. And I believe that it is time for the women of this country and time for the women of this world to stand up, not for a particular government, to stand up not for a particular people, to stand up not for a particular religion, but to stand up for life itself. And if life is moving in a direction that is absolutely insane, as Gandhi said it was, he said that the problem with humanity is that humanity is not in its right mind. It is part of the task of the mother to say, whether it's to a man or to a woman, whether it's a government or a religious figure, to whoever it might be, not with my kids, you don't. That, I believe, is our task. And so in this sacred place today, attending these magnificent workshops where we will seek a greater compassion within ourselves, knowing, as Gandhi said, that the end is inherent in the means. Angry people will not bring peace to the world. We must seek a greater forgiveness within our own hearts for those who do not agree with us. We must seek a greater compassion. We must seek a greater capacity for forgiveness. We must seek a greater capacity for serenity, and it must not stop there. We must then be willing to go wherever God would have us go, knowing there will be angels to our left and angels to our right as we do. There will be angels in front of us and angels behind us when we do. There will be angels above us and angels below us when we do. And He will not keep us necessarily in light-filled rooms to proclaim the light. We will be sent into the darkness to be a light unto the world. We will be sent into areas of ignorance, and we will speak of love. We will be spent into areas of over-externalized, over-militarized, over-politicized situations, and we will speak of love. We will be sent into areas where people are sick, and we will speak of love. We will be sent into every corner and area of the darkness, and we will speak of love. We will speak of love when it is convenient, and we will speak of love when it is inconvenient. We will speak of love when it is easy, and we will speak of love when it is difficult. We will speak of love when people invite us to, and we will speak of love when we are not invited to. And we will know that we are joined by our ancestors. For whether it was women who stood up for women's suffrage, whether it was those who stood for civil rights, whether it was those who stood for abolition, we come from a nation not where we have never made mistakes, not where we have never been hypocritical, but where always, ultimately, enough people stood for truth and called this nation back to justice, back to its heart, back to its truth, and back to its creed, back to its goodness. On every dollar bill is the great seal of the United States, Ovus Nordo Seclorum, new order of the ages. This nation has been called by God to greatness, as I believe every nation is called by God to greatness. It is not unpatriotic to point out when we have lost our way. It is more than patriotic to point out when we have lost our way. It takes a lot of courage, I believe, to speak for love at a time when fear is so in vogue, and that's, I believe, while we are here. We are in this great house because this is God's house. God will tell you what to say, and He will give you the courage by which you say it. God will tell us what to do, and He will give us the courage to do it. God will open the path for us, part the waters for us, pave the way for us, and He will turn us into the women we need to be to lead others down that path. We are not here on man's business. We are here on God's business. Knowing that, we will take up the great work of the Divine Mother to give birth not only to children, but the imperative of nature at this time is not just that we give birth to more biological children, but that we give birth to wisdom. For if we do not give birth to a greater wisdom, then God help those biological children who are born. Pregnancy is serious business. Giving birth is serious business. Taking care of the children is serious business. We are here about our fathers and our mothers' business. May this weekend be our amniotic fluid. May this weekend be a time in which the Divine Father and the Divine Mother help us become the women that God intends us to be. May we be who God would have us be. May we then do what God would have us do. And one last thing. I think a lot of the cynicism and the despair in the world today is not only because we think the status quo is so much more powerful than love, which, as I've already made clear, we will see as otherwise once we stand convicted behind love as we might, but also because sometimes we are tempted to think that even though, yes, we want a loving world, yes, we want a more peaceful world, but we probably can't make it happen in our lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, I say unto our narcissism, only the most narcissistic generation acts only for itself. Susan B. Anthony did not live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment, but every single woman in this room, when we vote, surely her soul must tingle. According to the Buddhist tradition, your karma isn't based just on what you achieved in this life. It's based on what you were trying to achieve on the day you died. One day, ladies and gentlemen, one of two things is going to happen. There's either going to be global annihilation or something radical will occur to interrupt the current patterns. And years from now, little children will come home from school and they will say, our teacher said there used to be this thing called war. Is that true? And the parents will be able to say, yes, what did the teacher tell you? And the kids will say, the teacher said it was like crazy, like whole groups of people would try to kill a whole groups of people, but I said that sounded ridiculous, I better ask you. And the parents will be able to say, in all honesty, yes, honey, it did happen. But that was a long time ago, and it never happens anymore. If we do our job on that day, when the parent can say to the child, war used to happen, but it doesn't happen anymore, if we do our job, if we become the women God would have us be, with the courage to do what He guides us to do, on that day, our souls will tingle. And I can't tell you that we can achieve the world we want to achieve during our lifetime, but I can tell you this. If we try, if we pray, if we are convicted and committed as the mothers of a new world should be, we'll die happy. And that's no small thing. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.